Welcome everyone. Thank you again for joining us. This is the final session of our three-part webinar series on the Bay Area Seize the Narrative Playbook, which is the results of our month-long coalition-driven initiative to advance housing and racial justice here in the Bay Area, where we wanted to really dig into what does this look like in practice, specifically, practically, and realistically. How do we create narratives in our day-to-day work? How do we craft long-term narratives while fighting to win critical policies and solutions? First, I'm going to have Will Valverde from M&R come on, who's going to offer some practical guidance on what it looks like and what it takes to craft narratives in our day-to-day.
I'm going to walk through a little bit of how I see sort of the real opportunities that came out of the research in terms of our messaging and how we can be applying that. And then I'm going to walk through a little bit sort of how we approach at M&R developing creative that really gets people to do things. As we think about messaging, I think we oftentimes start from the place of what is going to get people to change, either what they think and believe or what they are doing. And sort of the two sides of the balance here that we think about, first is the opportunity. This is sort of the positive frame. People want to imagine a better future. We want to present them with a vision of what the Bay Area can be. The flip side of that is the idea of a threat. People are genuinely afraid things will get worse. They see things that they don't like in the world, and they're afraid that that's going to be the way things are forever, and we can't undo that damage. And in particular, people tend to have a lot of loss aversion. So the idea that I'm really motivated by not wanting to lose what I already have. I want to cling to it tightly. And anything that presents a threat to that is something that I'm going to react against really strongly. I want to take a little bit of time talking about some of the values and vision statements that really had a lot of resonance in the research and that came out of the campaign playbook. So one of these is that a decent place to live is a basic human right. I want to be really clear here that this is not necessarily the specific language that you might use for every audience, but the core concept here, the idea that everybody deserves as a basic human right, is by being a person, by being a member of our community, they deserve to be in a decent place to live that they can afford. That is something that a value that can really embrace and we can speak about consistently over time. So in a positive frame, this becomes, we can live in a healthy, stable community where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. If we wanted to put this in a more negative frame, we can say that the housing crisis, housing injustice, puts pressure on our community in all of these different ways. It affects our schools, it affects healthcare, it affects the economy. All of the things that sort of we value about our community are there. Okay, the next value here is our community thrives because it is diverse. This is something that really resonated strongly with people in the focus groups and in the research. We see that there's an opportunity here. We can talk about this in a positive way of saying we can build a Bay Area that encourages diversity, that embraces all of our communities, and that fosters healthier, thriving communities. This can be put into a more solidly racial justice frame as well. So we can talk about particular communities. We can talk about, and this depends on your audience and on your particular organization's focus, but you can really talk about this as saying we can lift up the communities that we care about, and we can lift up the Black community. We can lift up the Indigenous communities. We can lift up the Latinx communities. Our children deserve a future in our community. It's like a really baseline thing. It's something that is going to maybe resonate more particularly for parents. So in a positive frame, that's saying we're actually going to create the opportunities for prosperity that our kids deserve. They need that. They deserve it. We owe it to them. In a more negative frame, in a threat language, it is saying the risk of there. It's sort of really directed to the flip side of that, is just to say our children will not be allowed to do that. You'll never see your grandchildren again in the most basic way, and saying that we owe them better. So there's a sense of responsibility here on both frames, and there's a sense of doing the right thing by the next generation, by our kids. And then the last one I'm going to talk about here in this section is talking about the possibility that is opened up by housing justice. So a Bay Area with housing justice, or a community with housing justice, is a place where anyone can pursue their dreams. The reverse side of that is to say everything crumbles without housing justice. And we see this. We see that we've seen how important it has been in the current moment when we are thinking about healthcare, and that the idea of having people respond to COVID when they don't have a safe, stable place to call home, that is made worse. I want to talk a little bit about our particular audiences as we're reaching them. And the way we are talking about audiences in this case is really pulled directly from the campaign playbook. When we talk about what the base should hear, we want them to hear a few different things that are largely about making change feel possible and urgent. So we want them to know that they're not alone, that they are part of a bigger movement that agrees with them, that believes in the same things that they believe in, and that they can be a part of. We want to connect housing justice to other core values. So somebody who is with us on housing justice very likely also cares about racial justice. We want them to see that that is part and parcel of the same fight, the movement is the same. They should always be hearing that there is something that they can do that will matter, that there's a specific ask and a thing that they can do that will make a difference. Those sort of in-between audiences, those people who are persuadable but aren't really excited about housing justice yet, those people who feel like maybe this isn't really their fight and it's not for them, we want them to hear some overlapping message with a little bit of a different emphasis. So we want them to hear that their own neighborhood, the place where they live, can be better. If you live in a neighborhood that is not diverse, and you feel like, well, that's a fight for over there because here in my community, we are doing fine. We can afford our housing. We want them to know that this will affect them and will make their community a better place to live. We want people to feel like they're going to be left behind if they don't get engaged with this. So I think this is something that we are seeing a lot of, again, over the last few months. The protests for Black Lives, from George Floyd on to Breonna Taylor, all the different places where people feel like, oh, wait, I missed this. I was letting this fight happen without me, and that was wrong. And people sort of opening their eyes a little bit to saying, this is actually something that I need to be a part of. So I want to be on the right side of that personally, because it affects how I think about myself. And then we really want to make sure that for this audience, they understand that a better system is needed, that this is not just about personal virtue, that is not just about sort of who deserves what, but that people cannot make this change individually. It needs to be a systematic change. And then finally, what contrarians should hear. So this is a place where there's a lot of risk in what they are saying, because there's so much opportunity for that resistance to spring up, for people to dig in their heels and say, that's not what I want. Here we see a little bit more, in a lot of ways, practical arguments, things that are less about these sort of like high-minded values, but that really get down to like, what are we going to do? So housing policy can help control costs, that this is something that affects everyone. The idea that our children deserve better, I think, should be a central argument here, because this is a place where there really was broad agreement in the responses that we got from people that were spoken to. Even if they were resistant to almost every other aspect of housing justice, there's a place here of like, well, yes, but the next generation should have an opportunity here too. My kids need to have a place where they can also thrive. There's a set of language that we saw really drove either limited appeal or really drew sharp reactions against and sort of generated that opposition. These are maybe not words that you should never ever say, but you should really be comfortable with your audience and know exactly who you're speaking to before you venture into these, because these are just some really dangerous areas. There were not a lot of great responses to the idea of let's make room for everybody, or our community has room for everybody, everybody can be here. So I would want to shift a little bit more toward the idea of individual opportunity where anyone can thrive. So not let's just keep on bringing more people in because people start to feel weird about that, but saying we want to make sure that people can thrive here, that anyone can build a life and a future that they and their family can be happy about. We saw not great reactions to the idea of housing justice as a way of fixing or addressing past inequities. So our focus here should always be on sort of what is happening now. And saying that doesn't mean that we cannot reference the history of racial injustice, but what we really actually want to talk about is the current reality of racial justice and injustice. We want to say that right now, this is our fight, not because we want to fix what happened in the past, but because we can't move forward into the future that we deserve unless we address this right now. I want to take a quick tour through how we think about developing effective creative for campaigns generally at MNR, how we sort of get people to do the things we want them to do. Our goal should be effective creative, creative that does make somebody do something. That doing a thing may mean having a conversation with their family. It may mean calling up their state legislator. It may mean showing up at a protest. It may mean writing a letter to the editor. The 5 elements of effective creative, these are sort of the common threads that we see again and again. Our urgency, the need to take action right now. The need, talking about what is going to change, what needs to be changed. The impact, so this is why taking action, why getting involved as an individual member of this audience is going to make a difference and contribute to change. It needs to be relevant to your audience, and you need to be speaking with authenticity. We want to be talking about urgency. When we talk about urgency, it's not just why does this matter? We often get hung up into what is our vision, but actually why does this matter right now? We always want to make sure that the messaging we're putting out feels like it's happening in real time. It's about this moment in time. And it has to be about change. When we talk about need, this is a place for us to be really specific. So we want to talk about who is affected. It can be an individual person by telling somebody's story. It can be a community. It can be our entire city or town. We want to talk about what happens if we act. What is the vision for a better future? What is the change that we can make? And also we want to talk about what happens if we don't act. If we fail in this moment, who's going to be affected by that? We want to make people feel like their involvement matters. So when we talk about impact, we want to talk about what we want people to do. So we want you to show up at an event. We want you to hold a sign. We want you to sign a petition. That needs to be directly connected to the need. So it needs to be, if you take this action, that need will be addressed. All of our communications should be relevant. And when we talk about relevance, this is about who is listening, who is our audience. This is part of why it's so important to think before we start putting out messaging about who is going to be in our audience. In a lot of situations, the audience you're speaking to is also your subject. They're also the community that you are talking about. So we want to lift up a community. We want to talk about how housing justice affects your neighborhood. Then you are the audience for that message, but you're also the neighborhood that we're talking about. And so we want to be talking about the change that you can see, how it's going to affect you. And we want to be talking about how you matter as a voice, as a member of this audience that can help to make a difference. You also need to have authentic messaging. So where relevance is about who is listening, authenticity is about who is speaking. That partly means who is speaking, who is carrying the message as an individual person. So who are you putting in front of a crowd? Who are you handing the megaphone to? Who are you having sign your messages? Who are you putting out there in your press release as an expert voice? That individual, but it's also about who you are as an organization. Why is your organization talking about this issue right now? Why are you the right ones to be talking about it? And then sort of the very baseline thing, what I encourage everybody to do is you sit down to put together a messaging plan or particular piece of messaging is answering these questions. What do you want your audience to feel? This should be the first thing, actually, because people are really motivated by their emotions, by sort of the things that we care about. So do we want people to feel outraged? Do we want them to feel hopeful? Do we want them to feel optimistic? Do we want them to feel angry or sad or heartbroken? There should be a powerful emotion at the heart of everything that we put out into the world. Secondary to that is what we want our audience to know. This is often when we talk about impact. This is where we talk about sort of the mechanics of change. When is there going to be a vote? What is the ballot proposition? How do I get registered to vote? What are the sort of the facts on the ground that people need to know so that they can believe that their action will make an impact? And that's when we lead to the third question here, which is what do you want your audience to do? In most of the communications we put out there, especially when we're talking to our base audience or those persuadables, we want to give them something that feels valuable, that is substantive, and that is specific.